Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV, and we love connecting campaigns and themes on this channel. And Dermot Rooney returns to talk about Operation Veritable and how it links back to Arnhem. His next book, Slog or Swan, will be out later in the year, and you can find the link to it later in the description below. So I'll bring you in now. Good evening, Dermot. How are you today?
Woody, I'm all right, thanks.
So what I love about when you come on is you take these subjects and you kind of take a different view at it, like the psychology with Churchill's tanks show you did with us. And so, you know, Arnhem and Veritable, to me, don't seem to have an absolute direct link, but you're making a case that they do.
Yeah, they do. They do.
I mean, geographically, I see it. I see it geographically. Yeah. I mean, it's just, it's kind of, it's Netherlands. It's Netherlands and Germany. I mean, but
come on, get to first set of bridges, do right turn. It just happened to take 4.5 months before they did it.
Well, I mean, things took a long time in the desert, so we can forgive the British and Canadian Army for that. But
it wasn't even raining there.
It wasn't even raining. Well, we'll bring up your slides, and folks, there's a lot of slides, a lot of maps in this, so we're going to kind of plow through it as a presentation. But I will jump in with bits. I know Derm wants to ask me a couple of things as we go along about just how things connect. But I'm going to hand over to our guest to take us through this, and yeah, over to you, sir.
Okay. Cracking. So, Arnhem's Ashes, how Market Garden sparked Op Veritable's planning disaster. This is essentially based on mostly chapter 1 of my book. It's got 8 chapters in it. I've been back and talked about the artillery bit. Yep. I talked about Goch ages ago. I think that was the first one I was on, and my phone didn't work and everything exploded. And
that's right. Yep.
So the usual thing, you'll get it. So it's based on the book, which is based on my PhD thesis. So that's got all the references, all the anal bits, all the little bits that says da, 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 da. But what I'm going to be doing here is the glib version that's mildly more entertaining. And so I'll sound a little bit like an armchair general, but I'm a systems guy. I'm not saying this general was bad because of X, this general was bad, and this general was bad, and I could do a better job. It's just quicker to say it that way. Now, I'm focused on battalion level battles. Tactical psychology, it's all about how soldiers win battles. And so I went to Veritable to get a lot of battles, because there's a lot of battles. There's about 200 battalion level battles there. And get them all in the one target space and see the difference between how the tactics related to German surrender rates. But then the planning was just to do the context. And by looking at the planning, you went, I never realised that. I didn't know that. That's weird. But and so it is. And so I'm going to take you on that little journey. Now, Veritable, let's see. Now, slide, sorry, pressing button. So start with the blatant self-promotion. There's the book. It'll be out end of February, I'm told. But there's always a new snag, and it puts it back by a little bit. What the book does, it overturns the British Army effectiveness debate. If you're familiar with the idea that the British Army are slogging and pedestrian, they stop for a cup of tea after they cross Nijmegen Bridge, etc., etc. And it's the idea that there's this cultural thing. And you've got the left of the art guys who say, yeah, it's all British culture, you know, they can't do this, they can't do that. Bad commanders, bad morale, blah, blah, blah. And they only got through by using massive stuff that was all provided by the Americans anyway, when it comes down to it. But then there's the newer guys like John Buckley, who say things like, well, hold on, they've stopped doing that. They've stopped doing that colossal cracks. They've become more dynamic. They're doing operational art. They're doing all those kind of things. Now, John Buckley uses quite a chunk of Veritable, but he uses the top level stuff. So the things like the post-operation reports and the BAO Battlefield Tour Guide. And so that led him to say, oh, it went like this. And so the culture had changed and the outcome had changed. They won the battle, etc., etc. But all the information there, that's from that central source. So it's what the boss telling you what happened. When I dug down into it, I found it was not that. It was sensible stuff that armies still make mistakes on today. Things like command system design, so that's how all the radios work and how people talk to each other, about tactical logistics, about how you get stuff forward over that last mile, and about infantry armour cooperation, artillery suppression, as I did before, and this one about planning. I won a prize for the PhD, and now it's a book, and there you go. Masses of tactical detail, 43 maps, mostly battalion level battles.
Oh, 43 maps.
How they took this bridge, how they took that town, how they took that wood line, and how they didn't, which is more interesting. So people think Veritable's a bit boring, or they've never heard of it. So there's an outline. So there's Nijmegen, top left. And you can see the Ruhr in the middle on the right. And up at the top, there's 30 Corps. Notice how this map doesn't mention 1st Canadian Army, who are in charge of them, because this is from the 30 Corps history. So we'll leave the Canadians out. With 9th US Army coming up from the bottom in Operation Grenade. So you've got these two battles to clear this area of the Rhine. So the Rhine on the right and the Maas on the left. And you've got this bit of Germany that just happens to have some of the Siegfried line running through it. And the idea is to clear that bit before we cross the Rhine. That's a normal story. Yeah, the normal story is it was a great plan. We had a wonderful plan. And then, oh no, there was this terrible thaw. And then the Germans flooded everything. And then it was a slog in a bog with no room for maneuver, all that kind of stuff. Now, Veritable was big and important. Nearly 500,000 men fought for a month. 14 British divisions, the equivalent of 14 British divisions, for about elements of 9 German divisions. So not even counting the Americans down the bottom in Grenade, just that one horrible British bit at the top. It is arguably the largest named operation the British Army's ever fought, and yet nobody really knows about it. And it's because people have said, yeah, it's a bit boring. Now, I've got this image up. This is a Google Earth image, and you see the dark spots. Well, they're all gravel pits, flooded gravel pits. And when I was doing my thing, I was looking through the war diaries. You go, Victor Fire Mission. So that's all the core guns. So with 30 Corps at that time, that could be 1,000 guns firing on one 6-figure grid reference. And what they did was they so shattered the ground that they couldn't use it as farmland anymore. And so they made these quarry pits out of them. So it's arguable that Veritable can be seen from space because it does glint as the satellite goes over. So it's a big old thing. When they started, the Anglo-Canadian Army had 3,400 tanks, including their reserves. So it's potentially the largest tank battle ever fought. It didn't work out like that. So it's big, it's important, and it's not boring. So 15% of Allied casualties were due to artillery fratricide. So being killed by their own side. There are flame tank fratricides. There's Fallschirmjägers, plucky Tommies, bitchy generals. I'm reading a awful list here. You've got Churchill turning up and sacking a brigade commander halfway through. Just off you go, mate. Yeah, you're sacked. And it never makes it to any of the standard storylines of the war. It's got nearly 1,000 bomber raid at the start. It's got Dresden. It's got Goch and Claver getting 8 times the bomb load per person that Dresden got 2 weeks later. And there, of course, you can see it from space. Arguably, I'm on a limb there. So Veritable's narrative all says it's this excellent planning, then unfortunate thaw. And then it's mines and mud. So there was no room for manoeuvre and no scope for cleverness. That's Horrocks saying that, who was in charge of 30 Corps, the main fighting element during Veritable. Essentially, they're saying, there's nothing to see here. It's great. If you get things like the BOR Battlefield Tour there, wonderful book. Glad it's now in print. I had to photocopy it. Not photocopy it, take photos of the original documents years ago. It doesn't come with a fox terrier, but that was staying with us just to make my job harder. Lovely dog, by the way. And it says things like it's this idea that it was Montgomery's master plan. And if you get Stephen Hart's Colossal Cracks, he says the master plan was evident in Veritable, which was continued inexorably day after day in accordance with the phases outlined in the original plan. Now, 2 problems with that statement. As I will demonstrate in a bit, there was no master plan. And it was constantly changed. It was constantly being adapted. Soldiers were changing the plan for every level all the way through. Now, the reason that this, like the BOR Battlefield Tour, half of it is about planning. So this is a tour of an entire operation where half of it is about writing the plan at the start. Then it describes the first 2 days in descending level of detail, and then does a little bit on day 10. It merges 2 things because it's there to teach the post-war master plan doctrine. So it merges, this is the plan, this is what happened, and it blurs the line to make it look like the plan was great. And that's why, the unfortunate thaw has to pop forwards. So, I have to go back because the BOR Battlefield Tour opens with, at the conclusion of the Battle of Arnhem, there were 3 tasks. okay, we've got the end of the Battle of Arnhem. Arnhem's out of the way. We've got these things to do. We'll do those things. And then after we've done those things, we'll do Veritable. No, the first Veritable plan was issued on the 21st of September, 1944. So that's Market Gardens Day 4. Now, apologies to David Shepherd here using his Day 2 painting, but it's such a lovely painting, you've got to stick it in somewhere.
Yep.
So 2 days after this, the fire in that building's gone out. That building's largely collapsed. There are no plucky Tommies down there defending the bridgehead. They've all been killed or captured. All this ramble lying on the bridge has been shoveled away, and the SS Panzer Group is heading south to block 30 Corps and 82nd Airborne. The rest of 1st Airborne is in that Oosterbeek pocket. Things are looking pretty bad. There's counters all along 30 Corps corridor all the way up. Smart money, really. I mean, when you put your retrospective beer goggles on, you can see, it's not going to work now. The bridge is too far.
Yep.
Now, so a bit of audience participation, if we've got any domain experts in there. You've just done Market Garden. It's day 4. Things are looking a bit crap. You're going for another bridge. Yeah, you're going for a very similar operation. What are your top 3 do's and don'ts? What have you learned to do and not do differently to what you did in Arnhem? And we'll get to that conclusion in the end, right? We'll come to that. So that's kind of tempting people in to stick with it. So on that very day, Monty issues this memo and he mentions it to de Gangon, his chief of staff, who's going to then pass it on to Eisenhower in a meeting, the big meeting the next day. And where he says, if we're to take quick advantage of the good situation we have achieved in the general area, Grave, Nijmegen, Arnhem, it will be necessary for the right corps of 2nd Army, and that's 8 Corps,
yep,
to develop a strong thrust on the axis Hennep, Claver, Emmerich, then operate in a southeastern direction between the Rhine and the Meuse. That's pretty much exactly what Veritable ended up doing. Directed on the northwest corner of the Ruhr, the remainder of the 2nd Army would then move on Ham. Now, the rest of this missive is quite a bit of whining from Montgomery saying, well, if I was in command, this is what I'd do. It's really, really sensible. And why didn't, etc. I should be in charge. And then a bit about boundary movement. And that came with this map. Now, if you're watching this on a computer, I'd screen grab that because I'm about to spoil it for you. I got 2 bits of feedback on my last presentation, and they were, your head is too shiny, let your hair grow out a little bit. And so that's why I've got this fluff here.
That's why I wear a hat. That's the simple reason I wear a hat.
Yeah, I know, but I can't do. You've stolen that. That's your image now.
That's true. That is my thing now. Yeah.
So, and the other one was your maps are difficult to see when I'm watching it on the phone. So I've added, this. What you got there? It's 2 big lines. One of them is the Rhine. One of them is the Marsh. The big one is the Rhine. The little yellow line is the Marsh. And 4 numbered items. One is the Ruhr, so that's the brass ring. That's what they're trying to get during Market Garden. Number 2, that pink line, that pink phallus there, that is the forward line owned troops for 2nd Army. Everything else is full of Germans. The number 3 there, that's just north of Arnhem. That's where reality turns to fantasy, and the remainder of 2nd Army swings over to Ham at the far side of the Ruhr to encircle it. Meanwhile, this original plan has 8 Corps going up that line directly through Hennep to Claver as if they're going to Emmerich, and then they turn right to head towards number 4, the next set of Brine bridges at Wesel. Now, my question is, if you're Monty and, you're a tactical genius, why would you put 3rd combat power the wrong side of the Rhine? There's not really much reason for it. The only reason for me that it makes much sense, or the best reason for it making sense, is if you already accept that the Arnhem Bridge is lost, in which case Wesel is the next available crossing. A sensible situation, you've gone for this bridge, can't get it, what are you going to do? Right turn, left hook, whichever you want to call it, head for the next set of bridges. I've had a big debate about whether this is lying about the good situation around Hennep, Claver, etc. Was not Hennep, I've used the wrong word there, around Nijmegen, Grave, Arnhem, was delusion or duplicity. Was he kidding himself? Was he trying to kid Eisenhower? I don't know. What I do know is that part of the plan, large part of the planning, had difficulty getting old ideas out. So, we had that plan 16, plan 17, became Arnhem. This is the same theme we get with Veritable. So if you go back to the old Normandy days, and these lines are all from Nigel Hampton, the idea that we keep together as a solid mass of some 40 divisions, we're going to dash up in a big solid lump, northeast through Eindhoven, Goch, Clave, Emmerich and Bocholt. So Emmerich, capturing every bridge between Arnhem and Wesel. I've added a number 5 here. That pink number 5, that's Emmerich. That's where the Emmerich Bridge is. Those 2 big pink lines are the borders of the 40 divisions shoulder to shoulder, advancing during Montgomery's unified thrust theory. And that's the Arnhem. That's the Rhine Bridge at Emmerich. If you read Nigel Hampton, you will see the line that, and he's based this on all their planning documents, that there was only a single bridge across the Rhine at Emmerich. It's a massive bridge. It's 1,114 meters long, 75 meters high, longest suspension bridge in Germany. And the punchline is, it wasn't built until 1965. On the planning maps that they were using, there was a big red line that went up to the river and then carried on going. Emmerich only had a ferry. The problem with ferries are they're not very good at transporting large armored forces.
No.
And you can sink them with a 20mm bullet rather than a 1,000-pound bomb. The reason it's so long is this big flat boggy bit here, which came to bedevil the entire operation. The Allies actually built a bridge temporarily there for about a year, right at the end of the war. But they couldn't keep it up because the footings were so boggy, and so they gave up. So there it is again. So you see the line there that goes from the number 2 towards the number 5 in a lovely, lovely straight line. I think that route might have been picked because they'd already planned it as part of the precursors to Market Garden. Say Plan 13, Plan 12, one of those, I don't know. So it starts off as this adaptation to Operation Garden. And then it gets named Gatwick. So, and this is that process. So on the 22nd September, the day after Monty issues his advice, Ike gives it the green light. So we'll move that boundary. We're going to move the boundary so that America now controls between 60 and 100 kilometres more stuff than it did before, so the British can free up 8 Corps so that they can go down the wrong side of the Rhine. The next day, though, because poo's happening all the time, ham's off the menu. Sorry for the pun, but I worked on it, so I'm going to include it.
It's pretty good, yeah.
Yeah, and so, it's a dad joke, isn't it? Then First Airborne is now simply a distraction for the left hook. So there are documents in there that in the documents it says First Airborne just to have to hang on while we now go down for our second option. And so they're a distraction for the main effort. 24th September, First Airborne withdrawal plans start and Basel waits. So that adaptation to Garden waits. About the 1st of October, Montgomery reissues direction. No, we're going to do a new operation. It's going to be called Gatwick. And 30 Corps and 8 Corps are going to send a division or two either side of the Reichswald, as marked on this map using those yellow lines. One of them is going to go round the Siegfried Rhine West Wall. We'll get to that in a minute. And the other one's going to go for the bridges. By the 7th of October, Operation Gatwick, according to one of the brigades who was earmarked for it, was happily abandoned after one day's reconnaissance. There's various tactical reasons, but they pulled the plug on the 7th of October, and that was too late for Claver and Emmerich. Claver got its first dose, so Claver as in Cleve, as in Anna Cleves, and Emmerich, where the ferry was, they get a massive bomber raid. About 1,100 civilians are killed, and as far as I can find, about 70 soldiers. And they just get smashed for no good reason because nobody's going there. Here's a bit of a zoom out of that earlier map. I've added a pink bit there. That pink line you can see, that's the line of the West Wall or the Siegfried line. Yep. More a planning thing than a real defensive thing at the top, if you listen to some Germans. But it's a lot of earthworks, not much concrete. Then closer you get to the top, where it gets boggier and woodier. We've still got the one is still the Ruhr, so that's still the brass ring. The 2 is this unfortunate pocket that's the west side of the Mast that occupied a lot of British effort, for example, Operation Clipper. 3 is another large German pocket that has to be dealt with. So Second Army's got to deal with these things, and 1st Canadian Army has got to deal with clearing the Scheldt. And those 4 things were done in reverse order. So Gatwick got canned, and then they had to do 4, 3, 2, and then 1 came at the end. So then it becomes Operation Wyvern. They then give it to 30 Corps, who then give it to 43 Division, and their DZ flash whatever a DZ flash is called when it's not a DZ flash, is the Wyvern. And so they named it Operation Wyvern. And at this point, it's going to have 4 infantry divisions and 1 armour division. And the plan looks very like Veritable, but missing a couple of divisions, a bit lighter version of Veritable. Then on about 5th of November, 30 Corps get moved south to do Clipper, and it gets forgotten again. 1st Canadian Army take over. They take over all the planning documents, and Wyvern gets renamed Valediction. This is where we get into the world of bitchy generals. So here they are.
Fantastic world to go into. Never short of entertainment.
Yeah. Well, there's lots of people who know more about this than I do. And when I was a boy, though, that's what the Second World War was about. Northwest Europe was all about bitchy generals. So you've got Eisenhower in charge of every god, in charge of everything. You've got Montgomery in charge of the 21st Army Group, Crerar in charge of 1st Canadian Army, and Horrocks in charge of 30 Corps. So that's the chain of command for Veritable. What you've got there is you've got, if you go left to right, you get political general, fighting general, political general, fighting general. And that's kind of the reason I see it for them not getting on. They talk different languages and stuff. The main one is these 2 guys, though. Monty tried to get Crerar sacked about 4 times. He tried to get in place with Simons or with some British general that was hanging around, because Crerar didn't have much operational experience. And he wasn't a Montgomery man, so Montgomery wanted him gone. They had awful fallout. So if you take Crerar, he was a forward observation officer in the First World War, and then he was a battery commander. He got a bit gassed, but then he went into headquarters. He was a planning twonk, and he did all that stuff for planning. He became an expert on counter-battery stuff. And then post-war, he hung on for grim death when everybody else left the vastly shrinking Canadian Army. He worked his way up the greasy pole, but then he did a lot like Eisenhower. I think he was a lieutenant colonel at the start of the war, and he rapidly got promoted. He was put in charge of the Canadian military headquarters in London, so everything about how the Canadians are going to get involved in the war. He really pushed for the Dieppe raid, and then he got kind of excluded from it. He was briefly in charge of 1st Canadian Corps in Italy, but during a period where there was no combat. And then he came back and he was in charge of 1st Canadian Army. When he was put in charge of 1st Canadian Army, when that was activated in Normandy, one of the corps he took over was 1 corps with Crocker in charge of it, a real scrapper of a general. And Crerar, as I see it, because of his kind of, which he's constantly talking about, and it's constantly in this biography, which is good old biography if you get a chance to get it. It's all about he's got imposter syndrome. He's thinking, they all don't like me because I've never fought before. I've got to show them that I know what I'm talking about. And so he wrote a missive to Crocker saying, yes, when I take over, this is how I think the army's going to be run, and this is how I think the corps should be run, and this is how. And so Crocker gets that, and rather than seeing it as a bloke telling him, I do know my stuff, even though I've not been through the mill like you have, he takes that as some uppity colonial telling him what to do. Who's never fought a day in his life, and they just don't get on. And Crerar can't even change that situation. He can't talk to Crocker, so he has to get Montgomery to talk to Crocker, to get them in the same room, to get them all working together. And it's for Montgomery, who's in charge of an entire army group and the Battle of Normandy, to spend time doing that kind of stuff is really quite odd. Now, I read too much into this photograph. This is taken in the Reichswald at the 1st Canadian Army headquarters there. And I like a lot of things about this. So you see the old chat about mines and mud, and there's tanks sinking to their turret rings in the Reichswald mud. Notice how shiny their boots are. They're in the Reichswald. I mean, don't get me wrong, they're on a hilly bit. Some of the bits weren't quite that clean, but it wasn't constant sloggy mud. And the other thing is the way that Montgomery's insinuated himself between Simmons on the left and Crerar on the right. So that's the army group commander coming between the corps commander and the army commander. Whereas the army commander he's literally out of step from those two. And there he is sparking a fag up. He was a chain smoker. He had dysentery. He was constantly ill. He was really, like Eisenhower and Montgomery as well, he was torn between his operational role and his national role. So he was always getting involved in all the detail of what we're going to do with the Canadian Army after the war. And most of his biographies worrying about what we're going to do with the Canadian Army after the war so we don't sack it like happened at the end of the First World War. And so he's pulled in two directions, and it sounds horrible. Real family man, couldn't be with his family, all sorts of stuff. And here's a photo taken on the same day. Now, this one's got, some people we don't need to know on the sides there. But at the back, there's Horrocks in charge of 30 Corps. I've read too much into this. So A, the sign says a mess, and Veritable was a mess. And B, there's Horrocks trying to squeeze in between Simons and Monty, because they were like the two kids competing for affection with a big man. And that's me overstepping my psychology.
No, I think there's something there. Yeah,
there's something there, but it might not be true. So valediction gets changed to Veritable. Excuse me. 30 Corps go south to do Clipper. They hand all the planning over to 1st Canadian Army. Monty goes, get this sorted out, sort the planning out. 28th of November. So it's a good 2-3 weeks later. Crero comes back and he says, yeah, valediction, it's impractical. We can't do it. 2 Canadian Corps too weak. 1st Canadian Army's got a huge front, about 150k front it's got. We've got bad going there. The west wall's in the way. There's the Siegfried line that somebody thought had 1,000 tanks in at one point. It's all a little bit scary. We can't do it. And Monty gives him, I'm paraphrasing now, look, mate, you missed the point. We were never going to go there until the spring. I just wanted to work out what we'd need in order to do it. You've just given yourself away with your not very good at fighting idea. There was no intention of going there. Oh, okay. 6th of December, week later, Monty comes back with, oh, no, you didn't get the wrong end of the stick. We are going to go as soon as possible. Set D-Day for the 1st of January. Turn it from a planning task into a real operation. We're going to go and fight it. We're going to go and fight it now. And the reason is that Montgomery and Eisenhower have patched up their market garden related falling out. Right? And they've now agreed this broad front strategy. But as Monty sells it to Crerar, it's a broad front strategy, but the first attack on it is going to be 1st Canadian Army and 2nd Army. And we're going to be massive. It's going to be British. It's going to be us. We're very definitely pointed at the rear. Broad front, very definitely pointed at the rear. Wink. Crerar doesn't catch on to that wink, and that's why we kind of fall out a little bit. So here's the higher plans generally. You saw this map before, but what you've got is you've got Veritable coming down from the north. You've got Grenade coming down from the south. All the flooding stopped that happening. But what you also gets missed out is that there was Ventilate in the middle. And this was British 2nd Army taking the direct route to Wesel. At one stage, it was going to be the 1-2 with Veritable when Grenade wasn't going to happen. Another time, it was going to stand in if Grenade didn't happen. Another time, it was going to go if Veritable got seen. And in the end, it just devolved into this kind of tedious planning. But here they are. We're all lined up, already going 1st of January, all going to be taking advantage of the harshest winter that anybody can remember talking about. And then the pesky Germans get in the way. They launch the Ardennes offensive, and 30 Corps gets sent south to be the backstop to protect Brussels. As the pocket decreases, as the American pressure either side of the pocket, 30 Corps follows up the Germans. Some really hard fighting there. 51 Division, 53 Division, 6 Airborne Division do some really hard fighting there. But it's all over by the shouting. At this point, Veritable was supposed to be the counterpunch. So Monty reinvents his operational concept. That left hook that we're all ready for, we can do that now, just when the Germans are overextended. It's completely overextended. What we're going to do, whack them. Whack them while they put all their weight into this one blow, and now we're going to swat them back. They look at 3 options for this. First, they're going to use 2 Canadian Corps. It's a little bit light. Then they're going to use a light version of 30 Corps. Yeah, they go without a couple of the divisions and they'll go quick. Or they can use all of 30 Corps. Wait till 30 Corps is finished off down the side, down the bottom, and we can come back. These 3 options. Yeah. Now, Pangham, who's the Canadian Army head planner, I think he was a full colonel at the time, he's working in headquarters that's very staff-driven and mass-driven, where Montgomery did the thing, there's the master plan that I have. We're going to do it. We're going to do this, 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 and this. Now, you boys sort it out. You guys do the detail and the chaff. What Crerar ran was a staff-driven system where he would say, oh, we've been told to do this, work it all out for me, and then I'll pick one of the 2 options that you get. Yeah, and there's still a conflict of that within headquarters today. Now, What Pangham noticed was a worrying lack of detail in the stuff that they got from 30 Corps, particularly with the second phase of the operation. Now, the reason there was a worrying lack of detail on the second phase of the operation was that the 30 Corps plan didn't have a second phase. They just wanted to do it all in a one really, really quickly. Pangham was worried that there would be an unfortunate time lag. I've written this one down. An unfortunate time lag might develop before the necessary regrouping could take place, and by the insertion of another Corps headquarters and additional formations to maintain momentum of the attack. So because we'd have to wait for the next Corps to come through, it'll be a bit slow. Time would thus be given to the enemy to strengthen his several layback lines of defence, and the later stage of Operation Veritable might well prove to be as difficult or even more so than the first phase. Now that was ironic and prophetic because it meant they waited, and because they waited, they lost the Thor and they went in ridiculously heavy, and that's what messed up the plan. So by January 7th, 30 Corps saying it's definite signs that the enemy was withdrawing from the Ardennes. And on January 7th, as people who know more about this stuff than I do go, that's the same day that Montgomery did his press conference thing that said, oh, yes, I rescued the Americans. Don't I look great? At which point, was interpreted as him saying that. So his eye went off the ball. You can't really turn around after saying we've come and rescued the Americans and pull your Corps out and take it somewhere else. He got trapped in all that political mess and took his eye off the ball, so the counterpunch couldn't be quick. So still by 20th January, 30 Corps down there, they've lost 2 weeks in doing the counterpunch. Now the yellow line's there, that's 30 Corps heading back up through Brussels to get up to the top, have a pint on the way, and then launch their attack. The pink line is 116 Panzer Division, which had been fighting them, which managed to get to the far end of the Reichswald at the same time as they did, even though constantly being bombed, in contact all the way, got no petrol, got no nothing, because the planning for this was so slow. So any plan has to fit the weather. And the standard narrative is that great plan, and then on the eve of Veritable almost, there was this thaw. And who could have foreseen it? It's been such a harsh winter, and there's this thaw. In fact, Corps Main, while Corps Main was still down south, 30 Corps Main was still down south, the long-range Met forecast says there's going to be a thaw next week. Monty therefore demanded a wet weather plan. He says, look, we've only got this frozen weather plan, as far as he was aware. He got 2 plans, but neither of them considered wet weather. They were both, we'll do what we're already going to do because we can't change it because it's too complicated now. We've written this really detailed arrangement that all kind of fits together with the logistic plan driving it. There was a thaw on the 31st, and it was a full 8 days later before D-Day was launched, and it was launched incredibly heavy. And all those tanks and all those shells largely churned up the ground, and that's what made it so slow. So the weather has to fit the ground. So I've got another numbered map here. So we've got 1, there's Wesel, that's the brass ring. We've got 2, Husbeck Heights, where 82nd Airborne landed, essentially the start line for 30 Corps. You've got 3, which is the Reichswald. You've got 4 and 5, which are Claver and Goch. Now, those 2 got bombed flat the night before the operation because like that earlier bombing of Claver and Emmerich, you can't stop Bomber Command. Once they plan to do something, that's it. They're on rails, pretty much, it seems, and they're going to bomb it. It's there. We've really begged them to bomb it because we can go round these communication hubs. All those roads, we don't need them because the ground's going to be frozen solid. Now what we've got are masses of craters and masses of smashed buildings, and the roads don't work, and we can't go around it because the ground has got muddy and boggy and been bashed to bits.
Just a quick question about the mud, Dermot, because when the Germans launched the Battle of the Bulge, and the ground was cold and frozen there, surely the Allies realized that as soon as you put either A, lots of armored vehicles, or B, lots of troops over frozen ground, it becomes mud regardless of the temperature, regardless of the weather. Volume of traffic across a limited area just turns it to mud and slush. So I kind of find this whole they were surprised by the thaw thing a bit of a weird one because
so this quite the one I've gone for is I think it's Mark Henniker. and he was the which division was it? It was 43 divisions, Commander Royal Engineers. And he said, yeah, we get this frost damage on the roads, so that most of the roads are cobbled. The frost gets into them, the cobbles expand, the Churchill goes over them, you've got no road anymore, you've just got a load of cobbles just lying around.
Yeah.
You soon churn through it. If you're in lower ground like this, you soon get through that frost layer and start smashing up anywhere boggy, anything. So it was a dodgy assumption anyway. And then they didn't have that when the plan happened. So you'll notice that, we'll come to it in a little bit, but where Market Garden went with about 340 tanks, this tried to go with 3,400, so 10 times as many tanks over ground that's very similar. And frozen ground would get churned up by any amount of armor like that.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, essentially any ground in any temperature, if you put 3,000 tanks over it, you're going to fuck it up. Really, I mean, sand, jungle, whatever. I mean, isn't that just what that amount of vehicles do? Well,
I've let the frozen ground excuse last. If you look at Blackcock, they're getting the same thing. So it's frozen ground. Once we've been over it a few times, at those choke points, it just gets churned up. And
this is at the heart in some ways. I mean, James and Al on their podcast, we were talking about that. The broad front strategy is that the amount of crap that the Allies have to bring to bear now, all their engineer corps, all their stuff is that you kind of have to move it at a broad front, because otherwise you congest and you destroy the road network. It all does come down to road networks, and that even going into the winter, even in September and October, all the meteorologists were saying this is going to be a really shit winter, lads. And so every bit of planning had to go in with the fact that winter was the worst one in the 20th century or something. So I feel this weather, there's areas of this whole weather excuse is maybe not the right word, that I have difficulty kind of justifying. I'm sure you're the same.
Oh no, yeah, I'm the same, but I don't know enough about ground. I'm not an engineer. I know people who've done soil sample tests for the MOD on this ground, and they've told me things, but I don't know enough.
Okay. Back to you. Everyone's loving it, by the way.
Oh, cheers. Sorry for rambling. Anyway, so the operational and tactical levels both assumed hard frozen ground. Essentially, it's going to be impenetrable, so we can smash those towns with the roads in, because even our wheeled vehicles will be able to go off-road, and that never happens. They also imagined some magic streams and roads and towns that were, just not there, didn't do anything, didn't get in the way. There was artillery, armor, and wheeled transport overkill. So, like I say, Garden on steroids, like about 10 times the size. I've got a little throwaway slide on that in a minute. But the main thing was this planning schism. So there were two plans. There wasn't a dry plan and a wet plan, or a hard ground and a soft ground plan. There was a British plan, a corps plan, and a Canadian plan, an army plan. And those two were really different and got in the way of each other. So day one, 15 division break-in. Don't worry about the other divisions. I've only drawn those arrows because they were there. 15 division do the break-in battle and the breakthrough battle. So the break-in battle is where you fight through the forward defensive line up to the enemy's main defensive line. In this case, it's the Siegfried line, the West Wall. Even though it's it's an anti-tank ditch and some trenches and the odd concrete command post, it's not the horrible big teeth, dragon's teeth business that was going on down south, but it's still there. It's that big blue line going through the Reichswald. And you get to the end of you get to the enemy's main defensive line. Then you break through as you break through the main defensive line. Your break out is when you're fighting in core rear areas. So you're mashing around with core artillery. You're mashing around with air defenders. You're getting into where core headquarters live. And then you go to exploit, pursue. That fourth phase is when you're out in the open. Now, the reason the book's called Slog or Swan was that 30 Corps, 21st Army Group, were designed to do Slog or Swan. So if there's nothing in your way, you're fine. If you can send all your armoured divisions traipsing over dry roads, and you can go like quick. There we go. There's a word. I was going to swear there. Or you can do a deliberate smash, hook smash attack right at the start. But that bit in between, that transition between the two, when it's a bit fluid, couldn't do that. They could only change between one gear and the other, and the gear change was really awkward. So 30 Corps plan, day one, 15 division, break in and break through. Day two, 15 division, break out. So they send out essentially an armoured mechanized battle group to Emmerich, one to Kalkar, and one to Arnhem. And they dash down there. So it's kangaroos, Churchills, that kind of stuff. Blokes in rain carriers dashing down the roads to get to these places, or dashing down the hard ground to get to these places. Also on day 2, 43 Division start the exploit phase. So they break in, break through, break out, and they start exploiting. Now, 43 Division are just pinning 180 Division here. So 84 Division, the dotted goose egg at the top there, that's been destroyed by those other 4 divisions, effectively. Whereas 180 Division here is in the Siegfried line, up against the Mars, waiting for Second Army to come across with Operation Ventilate, which was eventually cancelled. 43 Division are going to pin them there, and then on day 3, possibly day 4, Guards Armoured Division come out, break through, follow through from 15 Division, and dash to the bridges at Basel. Now, all that historical stuff, all that stuff that's written down, those post-operation reports, they don't mention that. They say there was a chance of getting the bridge. We always thought, all the memoirs, I always thought there was a bit of a chance we might capture a bridge. If you look at the Guards planning things, it's all about capturing a bridge. It's all about dashing. 43 Division, it's all about elbowing other people out of the way, getting there really quickly. We've got to get here. We've got to get here. Dash, 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 dash. In contrast, the Canadian Army plan was week by week. The weeks aren't formally stated, but it does talk about, the whole operation will take 3 to 4 weeks, maybe 6 weeks. Week 1, we're going to clear the Reiswald, secure Claver, Aspinen, and Gennep. So that's that line there, that big yellow line with the number 1 on it. Clearing a forest that's that big takes a long time. It's got no strategic objective at all. Why is it down as being the first thing that you do? Week 2, we're going to breach the second defensive system. Now, when these plans were written up, that second defensive system effectively didn't exist. The Germans built it in the time it took for the plan to come into action. Breach the second defensive system and secure the line Emmerich, Kalkar, Arnhem, and Wetzlar, line 2. And week 3, break through the Hochwald and secure the line Xanten to Gelden. Right, now a couple of things here. One is that number 2 line doesn't get all the way to the river. That's because it's based on the assumption that Operation Ventilate is going to come. And that line number 3 doesn't even get to Basel, which is a core piece of the 30 Corps plan. And that's because they were expecting Second Army to dash for the bridges by crossing the Mars and taking the direct route. These are the two laid over each other. The 1st Canadian Army's plan is broad front, mass, method, colossal cracks, Hulk smash stuff. Yeah, the kind of stuff that people were taught back in England in 1944. What 30 Corps are doing, narrow front, high tempo, lots of initiative, lots of elan. This is all the Monty Schwerpunkt stuff that he was talking about in his manuals and in all his chats back in 1944, 1945, once he knew that his blokes could do the job and could fight properly. And that's what he was trying to do. But it never got communicated to 1st Canadian Army because he didn't like Creror, couldn't talk to Creror. Don't really know. So whereas 30 Corps essentially ignored Phase 2 and the Canadian Corps. So the plan schism also has got a chunk in it there because we've got Simon's. I insist on calling him Simon. Someone said it was called that once, and I've stuck with it, even though Simmons probably sounds better. So Simon said that told one of the interviewees in one of my sources, there's a footnote there, said he sent General Creror a note pointing out the repercussions and bad taste which would come out of this from our Canadian soldiers to be left out of the battle. That's how important it was viewed at the time. Probably the one that ends the war. General Creror saw Monty the following day, and apparently as a result, 3 Canadian division was included in the attacking divisions. So 30 Corps are planning the first phase, and the Army says, you know what, we're a little bit mardy that you're leaving some of our Canadians out. You've got 1 Canadian division in there, have another one. So what 30 Corps do is they get the task that they previously allocated to 1 Canadian division, split it in half, so they have to share it between them. So they're still going to be left in this boggy bit to the top left of the map, while 30 Corps dashes to the bridges and and redeems itself for its performance at Arnhem. Any good plan needs deception and surprise. All through the official sources, you'll see deception was great. They talk about this Utrecht deception plan, essentially pretending that what we're going to do is we're going to go north and we're going to head towards The Hague, rather than go south and east for the Rhine. Again, we're going to go over it a bit further south and a bit further west, and we're going to go north and relieve Holland. And there's signal spoofing, there's fake uniforms being worn. When the guns are sighted for Veritable, they're sighted facing north, when they're completely out of range of anything, just in case the Germans happen to see them, and that will give them the impression that the attack isn't coming their way. A really comprehensive deception plan, but it doesn't quite work. All the official sources say, well, OKW didn't know 30 Corps' location, and that's true. And they also state that Straub, who was the head of the corps in charge of 84 Division and 180 Division, thought that Venlo-Wesel was the main threat, and that's fine. But OKW had a 600-kilometre front, and Straub was kind of sidelined in a 2-division defensive role. His boss, Schlemm, on the right there, in his sexy German baggy trousers, said he spotted the Veritable Axis, and that's going to be the main threat. That's where it's coming from. And Weibig, who was in charge of 84 Division, he said the same. But they're both saying that post-war, we saw this. You know, take it or leave it. They could be fibbing. But Guderian, that's not the famous Guderian. It's the son of the famous Guderian, who was the chief of staff of 116 Panzer Division. Said they did too. And he uses their original material, say, we had this planning meeting. Schlemm came to us and he said, yeah, they're going to be coming over the top of the Reichswald and through Kleve. We want to push you further north. So can you move further north, please? Because he had no operational control over them. And so they've got records of that being said on the 4th of February. So it's not a complete surprise if the Germans are already reacting to it 4 days before it's launched. So they moved 47 Panzer Corps, which ended up meeting 30 Corps at the far end of the Reichswald. They moved elements of 7 Panzer Division, and they moved an entire Grenadier Regiment from 180 Division on the river to support Veritable in the north. Another big giveaway is that on the 7th of February, the day before the operation was launched, the tide was in. So they'd blown the dikes. I've got a mate, Stolpe, who thinks the dikes weren't blown deliberately for that, but I think the timing is just too obvious. I can't find a primary source record that says that. The Rhine dikes are blown, and then the Ruhr dams are sabotaged to stop Grenade, the American army advance in the south. And no matter how good the deception plan was, the problem was you couldn't hide all that mass. They had to have lights on to make all these bridges work, to move all this armor, to move all these soldiers. There's no hiding. There's just this enormous mass that gave the game away because they went late. Now, on logistics and mass, I'm going to quote this in full, and I'm sorry about this. It'll only take a minute then. Veritable's historiography lists the strength arrayed on D-Day. 268,000 men, 3,400 tanks, 30,000 other vehicles, and over 3,000 guns, including anti-tank guns and anti-aircraft guns. 30 Corps, therefore, outnumbered 84 Division, which was the main element it had to fight on those first few days, by 20 to 1 in men, 14 to 1 in guns, 200 to 1 in shells, and 3,400 to 0 in tanks. The Canadian post-operation report is particularly effusive, and I'm quoting a quote now. If the men assaulting for phase 1 were shoulder to shoulder across a 6-mile front, there would be 3.7 men per yard, while Corps Reserve would supply 1.1 men per yard. This excludes artillery, engineers, services, and echelons. So just the kind of bayonety and tank driving guys. These men were supplied with 350 ammunition types, which, if stacked side by side and 5 feet high, would line the road from Toronto to Oshawa, which I've checked is 50 kilometres long, while artillery allocation up to D+3 equaled a raid by 25,000 medium bombers. Among the more mundane supplies that are bragged about is enough unnecessary winter camouflage to make, and I quote, make a dress for every woman in the province of Ontario between the ages of 20 and 24. So if you're going to be saying, we've really planned this really well, how come you've got a really large amount of winter camouflage that you don't need? And why are you bragging about it? Now, to get all this stuff into the Nijmegen area, they needed 446 freight trains that's transported a tonnage equal to 89,200 3-ton army lorry loads, which, if placed end to tail, this is a quote again, would stretch from London to Edinburgh. That's 530 kilometres. To make sure that these roads could carry all that material required 12 formations of engineers, 3 road construction companies and 29 pioneer companies. So that's maybe 15,000 men, all just mending the roads to Nijmegen. Nobody was mending the roads from Nijmegen. So all that stuff got stacked up and then created a big morass. So stacking all that stuff up is what gave the game away, and then it couldn't do anything because it couldn't get further forward. You always judge a plan by its intelligence, and Allies were having real trouble with intelligence at the time. Essentially, they're playing Where's Wally as well. So bragging about OKW didn't know where 30 Corps was, British intelligence wasn't entirely sure about large numbers of stuff. So this is about the problem is part of their feed, the information that they're getting. They're getting less Enigma and they're getting very little SIGINT because the Germans are relying on the civilian telephone network. If you can pick up a phone and talk as much as you like and no one's interrupting you haven't got to put it in code, that's what you're going to do. There was a lot less special forces activity and there was getting virtually no human intelligence from the front. At the same time, units were doing a lot less patrolling because patrolling is awful. Nobody likes it. It just shits you up. Talk to old boys about, we're going on patrol. If you're going to throw a sickie, that's when you throw it. And rely very much on air photographs, which were fantastic. But Germans like to hide things, as we know from the great film about the bridge too far. They do hide things in woods and stuff. But the main problem is one of collation and dissemination, though these are the other bits of the INT cycle. And what we got is the 3 divisions that were due to punch the big hole through the middle, 15 Division, 43 Division, and Guards Armour Division. In their intelligence, all they've got to face is the sick, lame and lazy, as they saw it, of 84 Division, and 180 Division on the river wasn't really worth bothering with. The other divisions that were close to the Canadian Army, 53 and 51, had 2 imaginary divisions in reserve, an infantry division around Goch, which didn't exist, and a panzer division around the Hochwald. And that there was the only evidence for that being there was some anti-aircraft fire on the aircraft that flew over it. And so we've decided there's a panzer division there. So they were actually making the information that they got fit the plan that they had. So the dashing divisions had got no enemy in the way, and the not dashing divisions had got extra enemy in the way that didn't exist. And they also invented a few things. There's a concrete road that goes between the main road through the town of Claver that gets bombed, because there would be one there, wouldn't there? It turned out that the best bet is that this was a mud track that was coated in white sand, and from the aerial photography, it looked like a concrete road. And they also blamed the ever blamable Dutch intelligence for telling them there was a concrete road there. I suspect the concrete road was imagined to make the ground fit the plan rather than it being a fact, because people do that kind of thing. This line here, you've got, that's the line on 1st of February. I couldn't get the later one because my photo of the original document's a little bit gnarly, but there's not much change. And that curvy bit of the yellow line that you can see there, that is the forward line of own troops on Veritable's day 4. That big straight line, that's if you got those 3,400 tanks and put them nose to tail. They would get halfway to the bridges at Vaisen. Now, if you accept my thing, and we can argue all day, but won't, that they're dashing for the bridges, compare it to Market Garden. And that's what Market Garden did at the same time. So I think that's 4 times the area and 6 times the distance that Veritable got in the same time period. So if they're both going for a breakout and the first one is a failure, and the second one is a really big failure by any objective measure, it's just not done the deed, especially when you look at force ratios. So roughly the force ratio for Market Garden was about 5 to 1. For Veritable, charitably, it was 15 to 1.
And the German army in a very different situation.
Yeah.
Generally.
Yeah. So if you're going to end at it's the other side of the Rhine at Wesel is a much better place to be than the other side of the Rhine at Arnhem, especially if one of them's in February 1945, one of them's in September 1944. It's a very different fight. I think it really could have won. This is just a line from Monty. One of his things that those messages he sent to Alan Brooke every night, saying essentially he's putting the cart before the horse, and he says, "Today has been spent in trying to cope with very difficult situation regarding the roads and communications leading forward in the veritable area." So this is on 10th of February. So this is D+2. The only proper road is that through Wieler, Kranenburg to Kleve, and parts of this are underwater. The whole area north of this road is underwater, and operations in it have been conducted by means of ducks and buffaloes, vehicles, not animals, even though he spells it ducks. There are plenty of troops available, but difficulty has been to get them and their supporting weapons forward. The delays caused by these frictions have given the Germans time to scratch up some units to oppose us, and very heavy fighting has been taking place, especially around Kleve and Heckens. What happens is those scratch forces were already scratched up because the plan was so big. The reason you can't get forward is because the plan is the thing is so big, and the reason the road is flooded is because your plan is so big. They saw it coming because it was massive. It was a giant haymaker that was easy to spot, and they reacted accordingly. Turning around and then saying the plan was great is a bit of a no-brainer. So, we're near the end. So, why did it fail? Let's do the thing. Why was the plan so bad first? Because I might not have got this home if I haven't hammered it home. You're talking about 500 tanks being deployed on D-Day. Of those 3,400 tanks, 500 of them were deployed on D-Day of Veritable. So that first day, they go over the line, 500 of them. By 1,700 that day, only 2 have kept up with the infantry. 70 flail tanks are sent forward to mow through what is very similar to Polder. Only 1 of them cleared a lane before the infantry did it. They found about double the number of artillery rounds that they needed, based on my potentially biased argument. All those extra rounds did was smash up the water table, smash the roads, smash the woods, making it impossible to move the mass troops forwards. By D+1, maybe a quarter of the infantry were just digging out bogged vehicles when they could have been advancing and fighting. Every time they had a fight, it was a troop of tanks, a couple of companies of infantry, and they could have got those forwards by trying to get not a quart into a pint pot, trying to get a gallon into a teacup. That's why the plan failed. So everybody recognises that Monty led a blunder by imagining 30 Corps could get up one narrow road to Arnhem. But nobody says, well, he failed because he didn't get 30 Corps when it was twice as big down an equally narrow road to Wesel, because it just kind of got pushed up. Not in a nasty way, just kind of, awful.
Yeah.
It kind of slipped under the radar, really. So I think it happened because they're the power of an old plan. So Monty's original concept, we can't get this first bridge, let's go for the second one. Brilliant. That's just what you do. But he can't admit failure. And so he can't admit that that's the plan. So Little Hearts famously said that, the hardest thing, the one thing harder than getting a new idea into a military mind is getting an old one out. And you've been a bit of a dick because everybody's like that. We're all like that. It's very difficult to get that. That whole Emmerich axis was, a plan we had in our pocket. That's a thing that sticks in people's heads. So it's a thing you can communicate. So the left hook stays there through a variety of changes of operational concept and a variety of name changes as well. There's an old adage that you plan early, you plan twice, but more often people don't. They pick up what they've got, they assume higher knowledge behind the plan, and they don't question the assumptions in the plan. So when the plan goes from 30 Corps to 8 Corps to 30 Corps again to 1st Canadian Army and 43 Div, then back to Canadian Army and then back to 30 Corps again, they keep the same bits of paper. And it takes a while to soak them all in and change it. Also, there's this allure of map recce. So the whole thing about Emmerich was, you look on a map and there's a road going there must be a thing. All the way through Veritable, that same thing happens. Then there's kind of a command by committee and compromise. Some of the meetings have got over 60 people at them. So we're a planning meeting for Veritable has got 60 people at it. All you can do in a 60 person meeting is take it in turns to stand up and emit. You don't do any collaboration. You can't get your act together, and it's really, really complicated. That whole complexity complication thing feeds down the plan that 15 Division had to break through, break out, etc. That had 5 named phases and 4 changes of task organisation. And every one of the Armoured Breaching Force, and I think it was 12 different units in it. So we've got to get 12 different units to the right place at the right time over a swamp that we've blown the living shit out of. And that doesn't really work. And then we've got, at the heart of it really, as I see it, is poor communication of intent, or alternatively, selection and maintenance of the aim. So classic army cliches. So the aim was to get the bridges, and that should have been the intent statement, but Montgomery couldn't communicate it. Again, both division of labour and division of trust. This picture here, these 2 great guys on the 3 veritable videos made by SSVC that you can get on YouTube. Lovely watch. Yep. That's Peter Knox and Burghard Frank. Peter was then a major in the Royal Welsh Fusiliers, and Burghard was a colonel in Bundeswehr. Pick a number. I think it might have been 7 Panzer Division. But they're sat there and they're saying, yeah, great plan. Concentration of force, surprise, tick, tick. Now, they don't know that the concentration of force ruined the surprise because the source material that they had didn't tell them that. Yeah, Burghard Frank says, the one question I would have is with the assumption of frozen ground, because in northwest Germany in February, that's more the rule than the exception, the exception rather than the rule, that you wouldn't have frozen ground. So why would you make a plan about frozen ground? So what? I think this is the final slide, except for the thank you. It's Monty's Market Garden lessons. I asked you that question earlier. Did people say in the sidebar what they thought their lessons were?
They were mostly talking about the airborne. They were talking about, go on the first day, get drop zones. They were talking about the airborne aspect more than they were the market bit. But there are some comments for later on, but there was no specific ones about market garden lessons. So we're keen to hear yours.
Okay, so if you're going for a bridge, you've just failed to capture the Arnhem Bridge, and you've realised it. You're now going to try and capture another bridge. The 2 things I would do is not use an airborne division 60 miles behind enemy lines for 2 reasons. One, and the other reason is don't tell everybody you're going for the bridges, because if you fail to get the bridges, you look like a fool. And so that's what he did this time. He didn't tell people he was going for the bridges, and he didn't use airborne.
Yeah.
The third one is just, I don't know if there is a third one. And so while 30 Corps were going to be dashing for bridges, Crerar, who we didn't talk to, who you never know if he's going to be telling tales out of school, don't tell him. And so you've got 2 different plans that are rubbing against each other. And that, combined with the complexity, made a plan that was not just too big to fail, but too complicated to change. So you get the divisions going on D-Day, and all they can do is change the order of march. We'll put some of the imp first. We'll put light vehicles in the front so they don't have to go through that bog that our tanks are going to make.
Yeah, they're tweaking it. Yeah, yeah. Okay.
So you've got Veritable's got one idea. We're going to go for that next set of bridges. It's got 4 different names, 5 different concepts of operations. So it goes from a quick response, really sensible, to a heavier. We're going to retry that whole concept again, to a broad front-ish thing that isn't really a broad frontish thing, a counterpunch, not a counterpunch. What is it? And the whole thing was ill-considered, poorly expressed, and dictated by petty politics. That's how I see it. If it had been launched 2 weeks earlier, if 30 Corps had been pulled out and gone lighter and tighter, if instead of if they hadn't been throwing that gallon into a teacup, we might have had a different world. Because they had every chance of getting to those bridges. If they'd gone when the ground was hard, or if they'd gone when they went, but lighter and tighter, and not been picked up, we might have a different world. Because imagine getting a Corps over the bridges at Wesel, just north of the Ruhr in February, or even late January. It could have been done then. I think I know I'm going out on a limb, and everybody likes alternative history scams. I think they could have got to Berlin before the Russians, and then the world would be a really different place. But anyway, so thanks very much for listening. I'm always uncomfortable at planning because I've spent 10 years watching headquarters doing planning and watching the human factors go a bit pear-shaped. So seeing it in history has been really quite fun. But, there you go.
And we'll bring you back on when the book is out, or at least to announce it. Well, brilliant. As always, lots to think about. There are a few questions and comments from viewers.
Yep.
So Terry Down said that much earlier on, Monty's ops had a consistent problem. Concentration of force on a narrow axis could produce a breakthrough, but trying to force follow-up forces through the narrow hole often went wrong.
Yep.
I think we'd all kind of agree with that in principle. John Sowerby said, I mean, there's reasons why campaign seasons used to not include winter. Even a good number of foot and horse will churn things to mud.
Yep.
Ian Carr adding on that, Monty would have been fully aware of unpredictable weather after the First World War. Dennis adding, remarkable and sad that these interpersonal rivalries had such impacts. Good men likely died because of them, which is fair. An actual question from John: were there photo interpretation chaps attached to the division HQs, or were they higher up? You were talking about the recce and the intelligence.
Yeah, I think that was higher up. So all the photo intelligence, most of it got translated into defence overprints. So the maps that were issued to units had all the zigzag squiggly lines of there's where the trenches have been built on this map since then. But you would get a lot of oblique maps that would be given to soldiers. Soldiers like oblique maps because they're rather than top-down maps for all sensible reasons. So everybody's doing it all the way down, but it's a centralised system. And then everybody kind of repeats it as best they can.
Okay. Thank you. And then Ian T just kind of asking for some bit of clarification, really. So basically, Horrocks and the 30 Corps paid lip service to the Canadian First Army. Was this Monty telling him to, or Horrocks not rating Canadian First Army, or have I got it wrong? He says.
No, it's not. It's the whole procedure. There's a gap between army and corps level ways of fighting. And 30 Corps had this kind of elan dash. You just read their history. It's all about club route Europe. We're going to be dashing around. Cutting a bit of, we're going to be getting the champagne downers, and we're like this armored elite kind of thing. Whereas army level is about massing stuff anyway, and then the Canadians had all been through because the army had shrunk so much. They had this hasty retraining in staff college procedures, and I think they were 2 procedural and 2 in a box, and they couldn't get out of that. So massing all that stuff was all part of that show. And that's why they were pulling against each other. Whether there was an official, an unofficial, taking Horrocks to one side and saying, don't tell the Canadians this is what you're going to do, I can't say. But all the way through, there's people pulling in different directions because they've got different plans.
I mean, I've got a couple of points. I mean, one is when we talk about the strain, perhaps isn't the right word, but the little difficulties in the British-Canadian relationships, the Corps Army, the relationships, the divisional relationships, all of the problems the British and Canadians have, and maybe the Americans, are absolutely dwarfed at this point by the problems the Germans have, where people are handing their medals back, and people, and all that kind of stuff to Hitler. So, it's not helping the Allied situation, but the German army is collapsing on itself, isn't it? Where there are like rifts in the British and Canadian system, there are chasms in the German. But we agree on that, don't we?
Yeah. So I can because of the way history works, you can see failures. And military stuff, you can always see when it goes wrong, and when it goes right, it's hard to spot. Nobody writes about it for a start, and you can only see it from the British side. Yeah. So you see where it's easier to spot errors than it is to spot great performance. But repeatedly, there's great performance. British soldiers all the way through, and Canadians as well. But I only looked at the Brits really. Just doing this wonderful dynamic replanning stuff. They're given a crap plan, and they dig it out of the shit. The guys who were sat in the front cover of that book there, their bosses, up to battalion level, the brigade level, and divisional level, going, right, no, we're going to do it this way. We're going to change it. We're going to do this. Wonderful dynamic stuff that just kind of gets lost.
I mean, by January, February, There's no one left apart from a few replacements coming in at kind of platoon. Everybody has been doing this for months. The theoretically, the basic principles of warfare have been achieved by these units. You know, there's been some tricky campaigns on the way for the 3rd Canadian, 2nd Canadian, and the British 43rd, the 15th. They've all had some very, very difficult baptisms of fire, but they've got pretty good at the basic art of soldiering.
No, it's wonderful for saying that quite a lot of them are rebadged anti-aircraft gunners and things like that. You know, they're in a very similar situation. They're in a very similar situation to the infantry in Normandy, but I've not been able to pick holes in the Germans' records because they don't exist. But most of their casualties are forming up in the open inside of the British forward observation officer. And that's why those lakes are down there. That's where we saw 200, 300 Germans forming up for a counterattack, and they just get mullered. And they do it time and time again. And it's awful.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that comes, you know, when you broke down just the superior numbers the Allies have going into this, you have to think that maybe not at the command level, but those staff officers, those people attending, you know, when you said these briefings are attended by 60 people, and you know the people who are there, but they're not necessarily the decision makers. You have to think that everybody's just going to be nudging each other, thinking, with this sort of odds, this just can't go wrong. No matter what the weather does, no matter how the Germans throw a spanner in the works with unanticipated acts of defense, the sheer weight of this should just iron out any problems. I mean, is it overconfidence therefore a little bit as well?
I don't know if there's an overconfidence. I can't see that so much in there. There's some, and there's a lot of the sources talk about a perception that we're getting so close to the end of the war, maybe we'd let the other guys do the dangerous bit. But
I mean, maybe not overconfidence, but sort of acceptance of the fact that this is going to end the way it's going to end.
Yeah, but there's a lot of guys who's real scrappers who want to fight hard all the way through, and it's the shame is that so many men like my dad didn't really get the trick until they saw Belsen.
Yeah,
and if they'd have got over that bridge, they'd have got to Belsen.
Well, I'm planning a show or series of shows, hopefully, about the changes that went about within the Allied command after Belsen for the British and Canadians, and you know, Dachau and what have you for the Americans. How it just any sort of not anger but frustration GIs and Tommies had with things further up kind of just vanished away almost overnight once they realized, you know, it's the Band of Brothers Why We Fight episode, isn't it? It's like, oh shit, this is what we're up against.
Yeah, there's loads of that stuff. Oh, it's in Germany now. We can just smash everything. We're going to kick their arse. We're going to show them, because they've a lot of them have stayed with Dutch families who've just been treated like monk for years. Yeah. They now get the picture of how bad the Germans are. And they're going into German cellars and just wrecking their stuff. And the license to kill just goes off the scale.
I think Philip Blood, the venerable Philip Blood in Aachen, is adding a good comment here to kind of close things off. Ordinary soldiers of the Allied armies performed well despite their senior officers. And I think sometimes we get a little bit caught up in all the what's Bradley doing, what's Monty doing, what's Simpson doing, what's all this, and actually we forget that at the bottom is this continual slugfest, and the GI, the Tommy, the Canadian, they're all in the same slugfest, and everybody's just getting a bit fed up and browned off and a bit grumpy, and yes, they should be patrolling, but who cares about patrolling right now when it's raining and you're cold and you haven't had a new battle dress tunic for, you know, for months. It's understandable. I think it's why we generally don't focus enough on that post Battle of the Bulge to VE Day period, because we sort of feel that after pushing the Germans back, we're kind of on a fast slide to VE Day now, when we're clearly not. There's still lots more hurdles.
Yeah, it's the power of the movies. So we've got Longest Day, Bridge Too Far, and Battle of the Bulge, and that's the beginning, middle, and end of the Northwest Europe campaigin. Yeah,
which connects in fact your point that Montgomery specifically didn't really go on about bridges. It was, but then had there been this goal of a bridge, maybe it would have caught in the imagination, because the Arnhem, the whole Arnhem mythology is because there is this symbolic bridge over a Rhine, and that kind of overshadows the vastness of Market Garden, and people are talking about, you know, the left and right flanks of Hell's Highway and all that kind of stuff. It's just not really. We think about that goal, that you know, pot of the gold at the end of the rainbow that Market Garden had.
It makes a great story, and it's the para mythos. So I used to be a pub para. I was in 10th Battalion, the Parachute Regiment. That's why I'm angry all the time. And they got wiped out in Arnhem. So our mythos was that. You know, so one of the Arnhem VCs was one of ours, and so it's got that romance to it. Whereas Veritable, it's all kind of brushed over. It's all hush hush, nothing to see here. So, you know.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of people, we will round things out. I think a lot of people who would consider themselves World War II buffs would struggle to talk at much length about Veritable, except mud, forests, and it didn't go very well. They're basically the three things I would be able to say, and lots of artillery, and lots of everything. But the minutiae, whereas most people in a pub could draw a kind of a map of Market Garden on the back of a beer mat, I don't think most people, myself included, could do a Veritable sketch on the back of a beer mat. I could, right now, I probably could, thanks to your maps. But generally,
it was Veritable is like a cult classic. You know, it's one of those movies that only the cool kids have looked at. Yeah, and so I'm saying I'm the cool kid. I want more cool kids to A buy my book and B learn from it, because there's loads of stuff to learn there about fighting today.
Yeah, well, we'll leave it there. As always, it's been fantastic talking to you, Dermot, and very similar show in the sense that we have another British-focused battle into 45th and the 8th tomorrow, talking about the 52nd Lowland Division. I can't wait for that one. And then some more random stuff coming up next week. Lots of exciting shows. But in the meantime, don't forget to click like and subscribe. Check out my guest website, their social media accounts, etc., etc. As we all leave we keep leaving social media accounts. I'm getting so fed up with Facebook right now. I ditched Twitter pretty much, but it's just becoming a nightmare everywhere now. But via whatever medium we are communicating at in 6 months' time, check out people's accounts. Thank you, Dermot. Thank you, everybody. See you all tomorrow. Cheers.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you. Cheers, buddy.